What's going on, friends? We are out in the garage for my, let's call it hypertrophy phase, primary deadlift, secondary squat day. So whatever you want to make of that. My main goals for the day is one, to have fun. The longer I've coached, the longer I've trained, the more I've observed that one of the biggest predictors of how fast somebody progresses is how much they're enjoying their training. Because people tend to work harder when they're having fun. They tend to prepare better for something they're looking forward to. And lots of times someone will be doing lots of things suboptimal, but if they're the guy who loves their training and they're thinking about it all day and they're looking forward to it, that's the same guy that I see progressing when compared to someone who's doing a lot of smart things but doesn't seem to enjoy it. They're not looking forward to it. They're kind of forcing themselves to do it. So I really think that training enjoyment is a factor when you're writing up a good program, right? Is if you fucking hate it, you're not going to stick with it. And if you do stick with it, you're still not going to be kind of seeing the kind of results that you're going to see from training in a manner you enjoy, right? So that should be a consideration. It shouldn't be the only consideration if our goals are getting stronger, not just to have fun. There's other things we have to think about, obviously, right? It's kind of my channel is not telling you how to enjoy training. I try to convey the other things that we might need to spend some time thinking about. But it absolutely should be a factor when we're like, okay, we're looking at our volume, our frequencies, our exercise selection, our intensities. These are all things that are going to be thought about, like our periodization, when we're kind of coming up with our plan to get better. And enjoyment should at least be a consideration. So that's my number one priority for the day is make sure I have a good time because I like working hard. I like lifting weights. It's the best part of my day. I'm happy I get to do it. And so I just have to be present in the moment and remember, I really like lifting weights. I'm going to have a good time lifting weights. The second objective for the day is going to be getting in some volume on front squats. I believe the planned working weight is 355. I don't know how that's going to go. I'm still pretty sore from my primary squat day where I did a lot of volume. I might auto-regulate back the weight a little bit because right now the priority is volume, right? We're going to touch on this with the third goal, which is getting in some deadlifting. But right now we're in a phase of training, right? And you can break up training into a whole lot of different ways. If you subscribe to the kind of traditional triphasic block. And what do I mean when I say a traditional triphasic block training? It literally just means you have some number of weeks of hypertrophy training where let's just say practically we're training in the 6 to 10 range, accumulating a lot of sets, trying to get bigger muscles. We have a strength phase where we're training kind of in that 3 to 6 range, maybe 4 to 6, 3 to 6, whatever the hell you want to pick there. Again, accumulating good working sets. And effectively what we're doing is we put on muscle in that hypertrophy phase. The idea is, we enter a strength phase and we kind of teach that muscle we've laid down to be neurally efficient and strong. So we start kind of building using that base. And I always have liked the analogy of a pyramid, right? It's not super big brain. This isn't like some complex thing that you guys haven't heard of, but I do think it's sometimes very helpful to think a little dumber. Think of when you were getting into this. Because sometimes I think we can miss the forest for the trees when we start getting so hyper fixated on what are really important technical details. We fail to see the bigger picture of what we're actually doing as far as developing our body, right? And I've always liked the period model, like our initial phase of training. Oh, and then we've got a peaking phase, which is the peak of the pyramid, which is we've built all of this, and this period of training is dedicated to best expressing all of this other stuff that we've done in the form of 1RM or a 3RM or a competition. We have the peaking phase, which is just getting us ready to display that. It's not necessarily building as much because it's the top of the pyramid. And sometimes I do think it's important to kind of bite our ego and say, okay, well, not everything we think about needs to be high level scientific training discussion. There is a lot of wisdom in bro science. There's a lot of wisdom in these guys who never had the chance to go to college and get an exercise science degree, so they don't have the technical jargon to make you think they're discussing high-level training topics. Sometimes you have guys who have been training for a long time, who have been running effectively experiments in the gym, trying to figure out what they need to do to get stronger. And while they don't have the language to necessarily communicate that in a way that sounds really smart. There's a lot of smart stuff going on there. It's the same reason that like I'll listen to a guy talk about his lifting, and even if he doesn't like come off like some extreme intellectual about programming, I'm very keen to hear what he has to say based on his success. I'm not just going to write him off like, oh, this guy doesn't sound very smart. It's just because he's a genetic freak, or it's just because of steroids, or whatever it is. Lots of times there's some real mileage and practical wisdom there that I like to listen to. And you'll hear lots of guys go with this idea of the pyramid, right? We have phases of training where we're trying to build up the base of the pyramid. I think of this training via, we're trying to lay down volume in the anywhere from like 55 to 70% range. Lots of times I don't even work off of percents here. I just work off of weights I know are going to be difficult in a 6 to 10 rep range. We're trying to just build this big base. We're trying to eat in a way that's conducive to building this base. We become someone who looks like they're better at squatting, benching, or deadlifting, right? So it's like in our base phase, we want to look like someone who's good at squatting. Well, what does someone who's good at squatting look like? Frankly, they've got big legs. So our goal is to get big legs. That's kind of what we're getting after. And it's probably better to build those big legs using some of the same motions that we're concerned about our strength on. So rather than just doing like a bunch of hack squats and leg extensions and walking lunges, which will absolutely get you huge legs, we should probably be using the squat or the front squat, if that's what we're concerned with being strong on, as one of our tools. That way we're not spending time away from it, but that's what we're trying to do. And then we move into that middle phase of the pyramid where we're not necessarily widening the base anymore, but we're taking that hypertrophic base where you look like someone who's slightly stronger at this lift now, and we start becoming that person by just putting in heavy training in that 4 to 6 rep range. Auto-regulating your volume. Maybe you like to do ramping sets. Maybe you like to do 3 straight sets and then an AMRAP. Maybe you like to do a top set and back downs. All of these can work. It's really just about putting in those appropriate difficulty sets, probably 2 times a week on each lift if you can. Eating in a way, again, that's conducive to seeing adaptation, sleeping in a way that's conducive to see adaptation. And you move into that final phase, and depending on what you're peaking for, your peaking phase might look very different, but at some point we're decaying our fatigue. At some point we're practicing some heavy singles to make sure we master that skill. Whatever it is, it's then taking a look at, okay, well, we built this pyramid for a reason. What are we trying to get better at? Is it a bench 1 RM? Is it a bench 3 RM? Is it a axle clean and press for a strongman competition? Well, how many reps is that for? That's gonna determine what this pyramid is building towards. And that peaking in 3rd phase, if you wanna break it up, is just gonna be how do we best take what we have built over the last 6-8 weeks and display that to the absolute maximum capability. Make sure our form is as best it's going to be on the competition day. And I think that you don't necessarily always need to think of your training in discrete. This couple of weeks is the hypertrophy block. This couple of weeks is the strength block. As long as it's a gradual progression towards that peak, because a pyramid doesn't have distinct sections. We can label the sections over it, but it's just a gradual upwards taper into the heavy weights. So your training can very much be that same way. So with those goals in mind, my second goal for the day is going to be putting in some good front squats. I feel like my quads are a bit weak right now. My knees feel a little achy and junky, which just historically looking back, there's only a couple reasons my knees will get mad at me. One is introducing push presses without having done push presses for a while, just applying force in a position where I'm not used to reversing the weight. That is what it is. 2 is when I'm bad with the weight distribution in my feet. So oftentimes if I am squatting and my mobility is not so good, I will lose a lot of the weight off of my heel, and the majority of my weight will rock into my forefoot at the bottom position. That'll piss off my knees. So working on my mobility, working on my mobility and ability to keep that pressure even from front to back in my foot is solution number 2. But number 3, when my knees get junky, it's because maybe my quads are a little behind, which isn't surprising. I find that quads are a uniquely difficult muscle to maximally train, or optimally train, if we want to say that word, in a home gym setting without something like a belt squat, a leg press, a hack squat, a leg extension, things that let you run up additional volume without some of these things that tend to limit us before we reach the recovery capabilities of our quads. And Max and I want to get a belt squat and a leg extension in here eventually. Max has got to buy a car right now, so we're putting off splitting that. And I also need to save up money before that's an option as well. But that's something we'll look to fix. But in the meantime, what can I do to make sure my quads catch back up? maybe skew my front squatting a little bit more towards the volume side of things for a lot of this block, and kind of make sure we're hitting the quads hard twice a week. Not just front squatting heavy for the benefits it yields, kind of my mobility, my trunk strength, my mid-back strength, which I get from the heavy front squats. I find that if I put in adequate volume, it does also act as a very solid quad stimulus, whereas a low volume front squat workout I find is a little bit more trunk and back centric, which is great for a deadlift day. But given my goal is also to assist my squat right now, might lean a little bit more towards the volume. We'll see how that goes. And then just putting in some deadlifts. Gonna be nothing crazy, nothing heavy today. I think my working weight is only like 530. Just gonna put in a couple sets. Because I have a longer torso and shorter arms and a reasonably strong deadlifter, deadlifting volume tends to bang me up pretty disproportionately. So one of the things I'm focused on this early phase is just gradually building up my work capacity on the deadlifts, because historically I got one tough working set in me per week. Maybe I can sneak in like a half set via some stiff legs and then fill up that extra volume with accessories. But I would like to be able to handle a few more actually difficult deadlifting sets per week. So that's going to be a goal of the next 3 to 4 weeks, is just developing some work capacity. And then the final goal of the session is to then just do some bodybuilding work. Imagine someone who's good at deadlifting. What muscles are big? Well, I'm gonna go train to get those muscles big. So I imagine a big conventional deadlifter has very well-developed, a well-developed back and a well-developed posterior chain. So we're gonna do some back and posterior chain. So that's the plan for the day. It's a long ass intro, but thank you guys. This is probably gonna be a really long video, but been thinking about my training a lot, haven't been logging my training a lot, so lots of just passing thoughts that I could touch on. Yeah. Okay, I don't really feel like filming this shit. It's pretty boring, but just to let you know what I'm doing to get warm before I start front squatting. I'm doing a quick little giant set of things that I feel prepare me best to front squat before I start my specific warm-up. So for me, that is some calf work to warm up my ankles. It's just a problem area for me. And I want big calves, and they tend to help a little bit more in strongman than they do other strength sports. So I can certainly justify more than just a little bit. So round one in my quick warm-up giant set will be single leg calf raises. I like doing bilateral once a week and single leg once a week. Kind of challenge the stabilizers. Just like one of the benefits to doing a Bulgarian split squat over a leg press is that we're gonna maybe challenge our glutes and our adductors more to stabilize that single leg. Where there's smaller musculature running along your shin that is going to be better challenged by a single leg, which I've found has made my ankles a million times more resistant. So that's round one. Round two is preparing another physical quality that makes me front squat a lot better, and that is just my flexibility. So round two of the giant set is actually just gonna be a couple different stretches I feel prepare me to hit good positions on the front squat. And then round three is just gonna be some quick low scale ab stuff, because I find that if I just do a little direct ab training beforehand, lots of people will push back on the idea of activation, right? Because if a muscle wasn't active, you wouldn't be able to stand straight up and down. So maybe activation isn't the right word, but I've always thought that was like a little semantic to be like, oh, it's not activation. You know what we mean. Like, even if we understand that, well, your glutes are already active because you can stand straight up and down. It's not activation. Yes, but most of us saying that like aren't really thinking the glutes were off. I think that's kind of something that's died off a little bit. It's just a term to use a muscle in a lower scale motion beforehand, warm it up, develop some like good mind muscle connection and proprioception with that muscle, and get a light pump, because sometimes doing a lower scale like motion for a specific muscle makes a lift feel better. So yes, maybe saying activating your glutes before squats isn't the right way to call it. It's still a phenomenon that many people observe, that doing a low scale glute motion makes their squat feel better. And they don't want to say that big jumbly sentence of, oh, doing a low scale glute activation exercise actually isn't activating, it's proprioceptive and maybe getting a light pump, it helps my squat motor patterning. They just say activating, just give them a pass. I don't think that's like a hill science-based guys should be prepared to die on. And maybe I'm in my own little echo chamber on the internet of people who care about that more than what most people do. But rant aside, I find that doing some mobility helps a good deal. And then the third part of the giant set I'm doing is going to be a little bit of work on hanging leg raises, I think, is my ab motion for the day. Getting in some of my work sets that I would normally do at the end of the session now, so the session doesn't run too long, which is always nice. If you know who I am, you probably know who Brian Alsbrough is. He really likes doing his training in giant sets. So if you have like rules you follow in your training of, oh, if I deadlift, I train abs. If I bench, I row. If I overhead press, I pull down. Well, sometimes you can add those things to a superset or a giant set in those if-then statements, as long as it doesn't interfere with your performance on the main lift, to make it so that you can fit in all this extra work you like to have, whether it be for structural symmetry or whatever, without the training time getting excessively long. And I also find that for like warm-ups, if there's physical qualities that make me better at front squatting, I'll just make a giant set out of them at the beginning of the session, get my heart rate up, break a sweat, and then we're gonna get into some front squats. And we'll make the call on what to do based on how my knees and legs are feeling. Don't wanna jump into pushing these crazy hard too quickly, but I do think that we gotta push the envelope on these a little bit, even if that means my deadlifting numbers early are hurt, because the main goal right now is deadlifting work capacity anyway. All right, we just finished up the second round of the warm-up giant set. Going good, body's starting to wake up a little bit. It always scares the shit out of me how all these younger dudes or dudes newer to lifting, I don't think maybe it's not as much of an age as a training history thing. Once you're moving more weights, the risk is higher. But I see guys just go into their squats, and I don't mind a hyper-specific warm-up. If your warm-up for squats is just lighter squats until you feel good, and then you go up, more power to you. That sounds very reasonable to me. I think they could work quite well, but I see guys get up to their work weights so quickly that I guarantee they're not warmed with their lower body. And man, more power to you guys. That shit scares me nowadays. If my lower body doesn't feel like I've got some blood flow through it, I haven't gotten moving a little bit, things that feel like they finally are starting to get like oiled a bit, then I can start working my way up pretty quick and I'm fine. But I'd be terrified to squat heavy if I didn't feel like my quads have started to kind of open up for the day. More power to you. But been trying to think about what to do with the channel. I don't tend to think much most of the day. I'm very busy, so I don't have much time to think, and I don't really have like an internal monologue going in my head. Most of the time my head's blank, so thinking about stuff is a choice. So I've never really thought about what I wanted to do with the channel. Just never really crossed my mind. I make videos because I like making videos. People watch them because they like watching them. That's all there is to it. But I was like, I could put some thought into what I want to do with it, and maybe that would help me with my chronic issues of not knowing what videos I wanted to make. So I was thinking about it, and like, do I make more quote unquote like educational type videos? Feels arrogant to call it an educational video because who am I to educate people? That sounds like something a professional should do. And then on top of that, I think the term educational lifting videos can sometimes be a little bit misleading, because an educational video oftentimes implies that there's a singular correct way, when it's pretty well observed that there's a wide variety of methodologies that yield good forward progress. There's a great Instagram page if you like kind of nerdy training stuff, Data Driven Strength. There's two of those guys. They've got a good podcast. They're smart guys that speculate about training. Good to listen to. And they made a post talking about how there's a wide variety of approaches that are going to yield very comparable outcomes. It's not this narrative you might hear pushed on the internet that there is an optimal program, and if you don't do daily undulating or whatever the hell is being pitched as optimal, your result is going to be mediocre in comparison. Even if it is better, the difference in result with everything equated isn't going to be that crazy a lot of the time. There are bad programs, don't get me wrong, but I always feel when people make educational videos and they do it in a way that is not how I would think about it, it often comes off to newer lifters like there is a correct, and that's what stresses out so many newer guys, is they hear, well, there must be one absolute answer like there is in many things, and these different authority figures are telling me that it's a fact that the absolute answer is different things. What the fuck? This is so confusing. When, it's the job of the person making the video to explain and contextualize this is just one way. And I know that's kind of implied, and lots of you guys are plenty smart. You already know that. But I think that it's still worth mentioning to keep everything framed correctly. So I was like, do I make more educational videos? Because as of recent, just try this type videos far outperform my training logs and such. And I'm not gonna lie to you, it's nice not filming my training because it's just something I do for me. But I do know that some of you guys really like seeing some of the training, seeing some of the thoughts that go in between. You know, because I feel like I'm a somewhat unique guy. I live in fucking isolation in the middle of nowhere, Montana, with the goal of getting as strong as I can, and documenting that process could be something people find interesting potentially. Again, it feels arrogant to think people care about my training, but they also perform far worse. That being said, I've also made the commitment a while ago that I'm not going to pick what videos I make based on what drives the most viewership, because that seems like it would make me hate it pretty quickly. Instead, we're going to pick the videos that I enjoy. So I've just been thinking, like, do I lean into those educational ones that people seem to enjoy? Because of course I like when people enjoy the stuff, as long as it's not shit I'm only making because people enjoy it. So it's just something I've been thinking about. If you have thoughts on that, please feel free to give me your thoughts in the comments. I will read them and I will certainly take them into consideration. Thank you. Also, so we just took the bar a couple times on the squats. Again, trying to get loosened up over there. Just something that I thought you guys might enjoy as a tip, or at the very least something to try. So I've talked in the past about how when I go to unrack my bench, I like to warm up with some reps with my hands open, with all 5 digits pointed up at the ceiling. That way I have no capability of squeezing the bar. The bar needs to be sitting in a point where there isn't stress on my wrist, or it's gonna hurt or it's gonna roll. And if I can set that bar and anchor it in a spot where it's not moving with my hands open, then when I close my hands and I reinforce that good, well-balanced position, I have good transfer of force into the bar in my bottom position. Whereas what I see a lot of people do is, because they're always squeezing the bar maximally, you can put a bar in, let's say, higher up in the hand, in this position where it's going to bend your wrist back. But by squeezing and reinforcing that bad position, you can get away with it until it gets heavy and your forearms are no longer strong enough to fight that weight. And then it forces your wrist back into what might for you be a suboptimal position. So kind of following that same idea, especially for guys who do cross grip, taking your first couple warm-ups of front squats as zombie squats. So that way you're forced to find, well, where is that position where the bar is gonna stay where it is without me touching it? And then I can take my hands back and I can grab it and I can lock it into that position. So then if there's a little bit of breakdown, I can resist it. But we're not kind of using our hands to mask what is a poorly placed bar. Cool, that'll be all my front squatting for the day. Nothing impressive. I just did first working set, 5 reps at 315. Second working set, 10 reps. Third working set, 8 reps. Just putting in volume. There's not a ton of method to the madness there. Just trying to run up a bit of volume. 23 total reps at that percentage is pretty minimal. But given how sore I am from my primary squat day, and the fact that this is an introductory week, my intuition tells me that this is about where I should be at, and then try to build upon that next week in terms of building up my capacity to handle volume bi-weekly on squats, given that the second one is fronts. So pretty good there. Moving on to some deadlifts. Again, mostly just focused on developing my really poor work capacity, because having a low deadlift work capacity isn't automatically the end of the world in, let's say, powerlifting, because all you need to be good for is 3 reps on the day. So the fact that you can't handle like 10 working sets a week of deadlift, and the fact that you maybe don't have a great 10 RM doesn't matter really. You could say, oh, well, I'm bad at reps, or you could switch that around and say I'm good at singles, which being good at singles is what every powerlifter should aspire to do. So when my only goal was a deadlift 1 RM, my low number of deadlifting work sets I could handle per week wasn't an issue as long as my deadlift was going up. But now that I'm competing in strongman and there's deadlifts for reps, there's gonna be multiple low back taxing events. Having the work capacity in that motor pattern to match becomes more important. So it becomes, it just becomes another training objective. Probably between my deadlift sets, I've got my working sets of hanging leg raises, because one of my dogmas is when I train deadlifts or squats, I also do some direct ab training, usually via hanging leg raises, GHD sit-ups or ab rollouts. And I find that if I do so, my back feels better, my bracing feels better, the amount of workload I can handle feels greater. So it's something that I think is very justified. You hear a lot of people, especially within our smaller lifting community here on YouTube, be like, don't be dogmatic. Don't fall for the dogma of advertisers in YouTube fitness who want to sell you on the idea that there's one right way and they are the sole proprietor of that one right way. Don't be dogmatic and say squatting deep is bad. Don't be dogmatic and say you need to squat deep. You know, don't say you need to free squat. Don't say you shouldn't free squat necessarily. Just don't be dogmatic. And I think that's a great message. But I also think that there is a lot of function to dogma sometimes in preventing paralysis by analysis. Some guys who really get that anti-dogma message and they learn a lot on YouTube Fitness. The problem is they know so many different approaches that every time there's a bad session, they rewrite their program, or they switch out the progression scheme, or they switch out their accessories, and they never do any one thing truly long enough to realize its real benefits, right? Like they'll do front squats for a while because they saw Paris do them, but then maybe they have one bad session, maybe they don't even have a bad session, but they're like, what if the reason I'm not getting better is because I'm not doing SSB squats? And then they switch it, and they didn't do enough time on the front squat to even really enjoy its benefits and truly understand what it was doing. So I see lots of guys who will learn a lot, and they're smart guys, fall into this trap of constantly changing their program because they do know so many different things that they do understand works, but that constant neuroticism of what if it's that thing I'm not doing is the reason that they're not progressing at the rate they would like, right? Because if you do one squat this training cycle, and then you do a different squat next training cycle, you can't quantify whether you've built back-to-back successful blocks because like you didn't do the same thing twice in a row. I can tell you that my legs are getting stronger if I high bar squat this block and I high bar squat next block, and I beat like back-to-back PRs as one of my metrics of my leg strength. If that's a constantly moving target, we can create this feeling of forward progression when it's not really happening. And I think that's where sometimes old school bro dogma can have its place, right? It's just like, one of my favorite lifters, I say, listen, talk, because he keeps everything so simple, is JF Caron. There's kind of 3 eras of strongman training. There was back when nobody trained events. We all just did whatever our training is. We show up on the day and see who wins. Then there's kind of the middle era where guys would do this gym routine, and then also on weekends they would like travel and train some events. So we do try to be skillful at the events, but we have our base strength training routine of squats and deadlifts and overhead presses. And then you have more of like a new school approach of once we know what show we are doing, the bulk of our training is going to be the events in that show. So you might not have the biggest squat of any of the guys on the day. Your goal is to be the best at that list of events. And you know, I think that methodology works really well. Someone like Martin, someone like Novikov, the vast majority of their training as soon as they sign up for a show is going to be the events, right? But I really like that middle era of, okay, we have our, like, let's say our base capacity lifts where maybe a push press out of the rack is our indicator of our upper end potential on overhead motions. And then we need to make sure we get good enough at the events to reflect how good we are on that base builder. Our squat is our base builder. Our deadlift is our base builder. And because these are just foundational strength training motions, they stay in up to the competition, even if they're dialed back, right? JF is a big believer that deadlifts from the floor are just a foundational strength motion that should be done. And squats and front squats are also just foundational strength motions, regardless of what you're preparing for. That's your background strength training. And that dogma has led a lot of him and his training partners to success. Is there anything magic about these lifts that couldn't be done a whole lot of different ways? No, but I think that sometimes just having this like resolute, if it's lower body day, I squat. If I try to get my stronger back, I pull from the floor, right? These like kind of points of pride and dogma, yes, they're technically incorrect. Like, yeah, I want big legs, so I squat, right? Is that correct necessarily, like the needed way to grow big legs? No, but it can be functional in preventing constant changing. So that's not something that's lost on me. And I try to keep a little bit of dogma around in my own training of when I deadlift, I do abs. That way I don't have the potential to fiddle with my program and forget what got me here and forget that one of the things that made my back feel a lot healthier was the inclusion of direct ab work anytime I deadlift. So I think dogma can have its time and place. I don't know. Don't know how I was getting at with that one. First set down, not feeling very good today. My lower back's still sore from earlier in the week. On my secondary deadlifts, perfectly normal to come into sessions sore. Just when you're focusing on strength training, it's something that's gonna happen. So the main objective for the day is to put in somewhere between 15 and 20 total reps here at 530. Relative to my deadlift, yes, that is terrible. But like I said, work capacity is something that is quite bad right now. So it's a work in progress. Where is that? So I can turn it off. There's my timer for my next set. But so that's the main objective, is just getting in a bit of volume. Aside from that, I'm kind of just fiddling with my form a little bit. One of the things you can do with your deadlift is, Max and I refer to it as cramming your grip. So taking your grip as narrow as you can, given where your shins are in a conventional deadlift, is something you can do. It's a bit of a gimmick maybe that's gonna give you maybe a more advantageous starting position, especially with a deadlift bar, but in general, cramming your grip can make a lift a little easier off the floor, potentially a little harder at lockout if we're really cramming the grip. And this is something that many strong men will use. Especially with straps, we can cram the grip to a degree that a raw lifter probably couldn't. Just a hand placement that would open up on your thighs if we didn't have straps on. And with the allowance of hitching, it seems to have become a common strategy, especially with deadlift suits and figure eights, to cram the grip in as much as we can, give ourselves that most advantageous position to make sure that we can get the weight above the knee, and then sort it out from there. Lots of guys do that. I don't think it's quite as good if we're going raw, and we don't, intend to hitch in training. So kind of finding a middle ground. Today, that's kind of what I'm messing around with, is maybe taking the grip out a little bit, smoothing out the lockout, or vice versa, cramming the grip a little bit. Just something I'm playing around with between sets, because I find this early block volume phase is that perfect time to do a little bit of experimenting, because we are just putting in sub-maximal volume. So it's the ideal time to experiment. friends. Bit of a oversight on my part. Forgot to charge the old GoPro. So I'll just tell you what I did while it was charging. I finished up my deadlifts with that 530 for 10. Then I moved on to finishing my final sets of hanging leg raises, of which I hit 5 work sets, averaging about 15 reps each. I hit 3 sets of 12 seated cable rows, 3 sets of 12 straight bar lat pull downs, 3 working sets of glute ham raises with my body weight, and then 3 working sets of back extensions against a band. That was the workout. Thank you for watching.